So, Jared, question of the century: have you enabled 2FA?
You know I did. Are you kidding me? I'm not getting my account taken
We
over.
have
I got
to.
too many things to do. I got too many things
I was
to
gonna
do.
say we
No,
have
no, no.
to, right? Like you
Yeah.
can't log into GitHub as GitHub without enabling 2FA. So by default, we have to have done it. But just double checking, to
Oh,
make sure
okay.
we do the right thing.
That's safe. That's safe. That's safe.
So guess what?
What's
We're
up?
on the home
What's up?
stretch. We're on the
No, no.
home stretch. It's really exciting. Yeah, we've got 2
Oh,
more talks coming up.
sweet. Well,
Wow. I know,
talks that
right?
are coming up. It doesn't even matter.
So many cool talks. But before we get into the next speaker, I'd like to do a big shout out and thank you to all our amazing sponsors. Now, as we said before, this is a first for GitHub, the first ever live virtual only event. So thank you to all our sponsors who have been absolutely amazing, providing help and resources to get this all off the ground. So we've got Sentry, Circle CI, Instabug, Ponycode, Microsoft Azure, and Micro. Now, these people have been, and companies have been absolutely amazing offering their support and resources. But they have given money, but the money is not for us. Jared,
No,
tell us where all the money is going.
it's not coming to me. It's not going to you. It's not going to Nat. It's not going to Satya. Every single dollar goes towards the COVID-19 relief effort. But there's more. For every dollar that's been contributed by our sponsors, GitHub is matching that. So, I mean, I'm pretty proud. I've always been proud to work for GitHub. But the fact that all of the money is going towards helping the COVID-19 relief effort, I mean, it's a very proud day for me. I'm feeling pretty excited to work here. How about you?
I love being able to work for a company that not only cares about its employees, like we get lots of love and care, which is nice, but they care about the communities they're part of, right? And I think that is it is so amazing to work for a company like that. And I just feel so incredibly proud to work for them. And I thank them so much, both like all the sponsors as well as GitHub for providing all that money to go to the COVID-19 relief effort. We know it's such a crazy time for everyone around the world. We've got all the people tuning in here. Everyone's in a different situation. And we're just so thankful that we could be here and to put this on and to provide the money to people who need it. So
absolutely,
let's go out.
Pretty awesome.
So proud.
I love it. We got some more people to thank.
Cool, but we've got more people. Hit us with the next speaker. I know you're excited about this one, so I'll let you do the honors.
Thank you so very much. This is one of my favorite people. So she is a world traveler and also focuses on helping developers collaborate as a community on GitHub. She's a senior product manager here at GitHub, and the name of her talk is Taking Collaboration Beyond the Code in GitHub. Please help me welcome the wonderful Becca Zandstein.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for taking the time to join my session this evening. It's a little bit late here, might be where you are, but thanks again for taking the time to join me. So this session tonight is going to be about how you can take collaboration beyond code. But before we jump right in, hello, I'm Becca, and I'm on the product management team here at GitHub leading the discussions feature. So I'm not sure if you watched the keynote from earlier today. It's okay if you didn't. But Nat and I did announce a really awesome new feature that I'm super excited about, and we're going to cover a little bit in tonight's session. It's called Discussions, by the way. I'm super excited to be working on a product that helps communities connect and grow while working with communities on this feature the entire time. I've learned so much about how unique these communities truly are, and I'm excited to really be bringing a lot of those learnings back to you tonight. All right, so how about we get this started and talk about community and collaboration, which is really what is at the core of discussions and what it means to build a community on GitHub. So in tonight's session, we're going to cover a lot around collaboration and community, and I want you to know that you can take away a few things, some examples of how you can start, grow, and sustain your communities on GitHub, as well as getting a little bit of an inside glimpse into discussions being used today in communities. GitHub's an interconnected community of developers, specifically you're at its core. And what I'd like to do for the next few minutes here is to take you into the future of what another similar interconnected community looks like, so we can apply some of those learnings back into how we can build communities on GitHub. Now, when I think of an interconnected community at scale, I think of GitHub and Star Trek. I know, it's pretty nerdy, it might be a little bit dweeby, but just bear with me for a second, please. They both have so much in common, as both are similar, or both of these communities use similar products, collaboration principles, communication patterns, and honestly, they have a shared an affinity with security and data. But before I go a little bit deeper into my affinity for Star Trek, I realize that not everyone on this session tonight might know what Star Trek is, and not everyone's spending their evenings watching all 8 seasons of Star Trek Next Generation for the 5th, or honestly 8th time, at least for me. For those who don't know much about Star Trek, it's an American science fiction show, and the main crew sits aboard the USS Enterprise, and their mission is to explore strange new worlds, seek out new life, new civilizations, and of course, to go boldly where no one else has gone before. So naturally, I couldn't help but think of GitHub. First of all, both of these communities have humanoids with incredible abilities. On GitHub, maintainers have created accessible and inclusive spaces to inspire creative coding for artists, for example, building lightweight and extendable data grids for React, and building bots for automation for some of the most high-value tasks that no one should be doing manually ever again. In Star Trek, well, we have more than humanoids there with great abilities. And while it's true that the folks in Star Trek are doing amazing feats with code, I'm not entirely convinced that they make it as accessible as the maintainers on GitHub. The barrier to entry on Star Trek is a bit high. I mean, they do have to go to school for it after all. And maintainers on GitHub do a phenomenal job making sure to lower that barrier where possible. Thanks to the help of bots, automation, and even actions, it's possible to extend the growth in your community, whether that's on GitHub or on the Star Trek Enterprise. I can say for sure that bots and some level of automation alleviates a lot of the manual work that people would rather not be doing. And when you have so many humans in a community collaborating, I have to say that with the upcoming release of Codespaces alone, we have a lot more in common with Star Trek and the ways that we can easily interface with code. Just like Star Trek, we're in a remote first culture right now, and that's at the core of what GitHub is and what GitHub enables. But Star Trek might have been leading the path here. And from code scanning, Dependabot, security advisories, and so much more, I think it's fair to say that our suite of security products stack up to the strength and coverage from the security team on the USS Enterprise vessel, namely Worf. And how could I not talk about data? Both GitHub and Star Trek are great examples of communities that have built amazing features with the troves of data that one can access and build on top of securely. So whether it's 50 million developers or an interstellar collection of more than 150 planets, both have one thing in common at its core. It's an interconnected community. Now, Star Trek wouldn't have an interstellar community if it didn't have a strong sense of community and collaboration. While this is obvious to the super fans of Star Trek, which might be me, I know it isn't as obvious how you might apply this to your community on GitHub today. It's important that we define what collaboration and community mean, both in the context of this analogy as well as GitHub's developer community. Both community and collaboration requires more than one person. And having a community means that there's a shared goal or purpose, and collaborating implies that there's a level of participation and ideally cooperation occurring within the community. While communities on GitHub have code at its epicenter, the people within the community are what keep your code thriving and improving. And there is so much more to a project than hacking away at an endless issue list and merging PRs. There's so many conversations that are happening in your community, whether that's prioritizing issues, keeping projects up to date, dragging and dropping cards, or even updating your documentation. And all of this is while you're still planning for the future needs of your product and the people that it serves. Okay, so now that we've created a little bit of a more detailed framing around what communities and collaboration could look like, both on GitHub and in some alternate reality of science fiction that I really need to let go of, I know, I get it. Let's talk about what it really means to start, grow, and sustain communities on GitHub as well as some really, really awesome examples that so many communities are using right now to help them meet their community's needs. So to start a community, there's a lot that you need to do and to be aware of, but thankfully there's tons of great examples and documentation for how you could get started. There's two things that are worth noting though before we get started on this phase. Number one, no assumptions are safe, so you need to spell things out clearly, even if you think that it's super obvious to you. And number two, just don't get attached to whatever you start because it's bound to change as your community will over time as well. Every community has its own checklist. This checklist is not by any means a full list of requirements, and at the end of the day, no list should be viewed as yet another checklist, since building a community is more than building a community is more than just ticking a box. Take the code of conduct, for example. Checking one into your repository is only the first step, but making sure that you have the right escalation paths and potentially another person who could be more objective and isn't sitting so close to the code is a great way to bring intentionality and safety into your community space on GitHub. But welcoming newcomers is such a seemingly small task, and it's a meaningful part of starting a community. Let's take Electron, for example. They use a bot to welcome newcomers when their first issue is opened. This allows them to welcome the newcomer, allow them to remind them of exactly what the guidelines are, and tell them how to contribute into the community. Electron also has an example of an onboarding guide. And so this repository allows all newcomers to have a really easy place to go and get learning resources for getting more familiar with the Electron codebase and its dependencies. Great examples of how you might want to consider welcoming newcomers into your community. Another way to make sure that you can set up your community for success on GitHub is to make sure that your community always knows where to go for support. Node.js does this by having a really clear list of table of contents in their README, so folks can quickly dive into sections that they need more information on, specifically where to go if they need help. Node.js also has a collection of resources on their website so that people who want to get involved beyond the code can do that. The Processing Foundation, which powers the P5JS project, for example, is one of my most favorite examples for a community that is specifically built to welcome newcomers and be more accessible and inclusive, as well as inspiring creativity with coding. The P5JS project has a section in their README dedicated exclusively to learning resources, which includes an absolutely magical trove of tutorials from Dan Schiffman called The Coding Train. They're great, and you should definitely check it out after this if you have the time. For newcomers specifically looking to contribute to your project, Good First Issues is a really great way to enabling newcomers to easily find issues that you have deemed suitable for a first-time contributor on a project. And by using the Good First Issue label, you're not only welcoming newcomers into your project, but you're opening the door for so many more. And we're going to go through a few examples of how that's the case. So first of all, there's a contribute view that a lot of people don't know about. And I know this exact example was shared earlier today on Twitter by the Node.js community too. So I'm super excited that a lot of people are finding out about it. But this contribute view is something that all you're able to see here are Good First Issues, and it's right next to the contributing guidelines, which is really great and welcoming for newcomers. Second, when you use the Good First Issue label, you make it easy for others who are not yet familiar with your project to find those issues when they're browsing the topics associated with your repository. So if you're also not using topics associated with your repository, I'd highly recommend going to do that. Last but certainly not least, for those who use github.com/explore, they will now see recommendations for Good First Issues. So consider using it because more people who use that feed will have those personalized recommendations on github.com/explore moving forward. Something else that the Node.js community does to welcome newcomers and set them up for success is providing a mentor for select issues. These issues are not as common, but when they are opened, there's a mentor available, like Anna here, who helps the potential assignee walk through their approach and reviews open pull requests. This process for allowing a mentor to be available allows Anna and the Node community to onboard the contributor into the community firsthand. As a result, the contributor can ideally grasp the inner workings of how Node works and how the community communicates and works as a collaborative group. Now we're ready to go through the growth stage and what that might look like for your community as it continues to expand and change over time. Each of these steps in the process is super critical, both the start, growing, which is where we're at right now, and sustaining. But I'll admit, I'm particularly jazzed about this since we'll cover a few examples of discussions. As mentioned in the keynote earlier, discussions is a new space for your community to connect. While issues were previously being used for questions and conversations, we know that doesn't scale when it's your to-do list and it's being bombarded with conversations that are super valuable and they deserve a space of their own. Newcomers need a safe space to ask questions, and community members also want a way to share their work and recognize what others have done to help them out. Maintainers also need a way to announce changes, receive feedback, and discuss upcoming releases. All of this and more will be possible to do in the discussion space. As we've been iterating on discussions the past few months, it's been really great to see how different communities are using it. Take ImageMagick, for example. Discussions is being used as a way for the core maintainer group to be more connected to their user base. So it can be more or less of a feedback loop from consumers to maintainers using their project. On the other hand, Vercel and the Next.js community have been guiding a lot of their community support needs into discussions so that answers are more easily discoverable for other community members aren't being in more of a ephemeral location where they were being lost and gone over and over again by the same people. All of that is to say that in order to grow your community, we know that you will need lots of tools to do this, and the needs for your community might not work for another. As we continue iterating on this discussions product, we plan to build the feature with this in mind, so that you will be able to configure the space for your community in the way that works best for your community's needs. So from being able to have the right resources and announcements that are super visible for newcomers, to having categories fit the types of conversations you want your community to be having, or even the ones that your community is already having, all of this will be possible with discussions. So last but certainly not least, sustaining a community requires a team, and all of their efforts should be recognized, rewarded, and perhaps automated where necessary. Speaking of automation, there are tasks that should be automated where possible, especially when those tasks are repetitive in nature. And while there is the potentially obvious automation examples that I can give you around celebrating first PRs being merged, I'd like to cover some other examples for super high value tasks that communities have been using to make sure that they're collaborating more effectively as a team. These two examples are for bots called Trop and Roller, which help the contributors be more efficient with their tasks, specifically for backporting and updating dependencies. So Roller, for example, automates the process of updating the dependencies in Electron, namely Chromium and Node, while Trop helps automate the process of backporting features and bug fixes. And to sustain a community and growth, all of the contributions within the community need to be recognized. So thanks to the All Contributors bot, it's possible to create a way to publicly recognize and reward contributions that go beyond code. The P5JS project has done this to recognize the work that all contributors do outside of issues and pull requests, because there really is so much work that community members are doing to get all of that work done on GitHub today within a project. And discussions are just the start of extending the contribution graph in a way that's more representative, lowers the barrier to entry for newcomers, and elevates the value of work for so many folks and communities that they're doing right now that we need to be recognizing more publicly. So we went through a bit today or tonight here. And so to recap, I want to go through exactly what all of the examples are that you should be considering for starting, growing, and sustaining your communities. So for starting a community, there's a few things that you want to be doing or you should at least be considering, from using bots to welcome newcomers, reminding them of your guidelines, considering using good first issues and making those more visible to other projects, and even considering mentorships if that's something that you feel your community could utilize instead of giving them just a good first issue. And with the use of discussions, growing your community and what they can more easily access and be a part of is possible. So again, if you're curious about discussions, let me know. And we're also excited to be showing you that later this summer for your open source communities. And last but not least, to sustain community growth, consider using automation that's already available to you. So many communities have made these available, and you should consider checking them out here. All of those projects are listed on the right-hand side. So yeah, for all of the communities that I've referenced in today's talk, they can be visited on GitHub to see how they have personally grown their communities on GitHub to date. And with that, I'd like to invite you to ask us any questions that you might have in our discussion. We're super excited to have more updates coming this summer on Discussions, the product. And with that, I'd like to hear what questions you might have. Thanks for coming tonight.
Thank you so much for that wonderful presentation, Becca. I'm loving the Star Trek references. My Slack was actually going up with love Becca's Star Trek references, and my is go. Jared, what have you got on your head?
What are you talking about?
Is that it's the Octocat? Walls.
No, Maya was talking about cutting hair. I'm self-conscious.
Oh, okay,
You went the opposite direction, Jared.
I was going to say, hang on. Becca was talking about curating community and good community guidelines, not putting Octocats on your head.
Sorry. I'm sorry.
Whatever it takes. This is how we build communities.
This is how we build community. Maybe we should all just grab an Octocat and put them on our heads, and that's going to be like our new community thing. Well, again, Becca, thanks for coming here today. This is your second Satellite appearance, and we know that you've had discussions announced this morning, and we're already been using them all day, which I think is really exciting that we can announce something and then have everyone go and use it for the thing that you announced it at, which is really cool. And I know we've got lots of questions coming from the discussions. So Jared, hit us with some of those questions coming from discussions and about community.
I would love to. And first off, Becca, I want to thank you for all of those amazing Star Trek references. I grew up, my mom grew up watching. No, but it was amazing. We have a bunch of questions. We got time for this. I'm gonna take the time to thank you for this. My mother grew up watching it. She like made me, and I'm not gonna say May, like I ended up watching it. The Next Generation from 1987 to 1994. You can fact check me. That was when the series ran.
Yeah,
the fact that you were doing that, like, thank you. It was amazing. But enough of me. Mish asked me to ask some questions, and I'm gonna make it so. So, first question. Have you been getting feedback from communities on discussions already? And if so, what does that look like?
Great question. Yes, we have been getting feedback for a few months now since we first launched as a limited beta with Next.js. And ever since then, we've been onboarding communities. We're currently up to around 60, I believe I announced in the keynote today. And the feedback has been super positive and super honest. So we've definitely made a lot of changes. If you've seen discussions 2 months ago versus what it looks like today, it looks quite different. And the features and functionality are changing as well. And all of that is thanks to the feedback from our community. So, yeah.
That's awesome.
And where
That's
can
really
communities,
awesome.
if they're using the discussions, and I know lots of people are using discussions here today, if they have feedback, where can they put that?
Right now, there's a feedback link if you're accessing discussions in any open source repository, and that goes directly to us on the product team.
Right, Jared, this is the next question.
Yeah, so the next one is, so obviously right now, a lot of conversations and discussions have been happening on issues for years on GitHub. So what if people want to take, like, for those issues that are already created, like, what's the process to get them into discussions? How do people do that?
That's such a great question, Jared. So there's 2 ways right now. One, if you only have a few or someone just keeps bypassing, say, your templates and creating an issue where you don't want it, on the right-hand sidebar, as an admin or a maintainer, you can convert that issue directly into a discussion. But the really, really cool part is that you can convert in bulk all of your issues into a discussion if it has a certain label. So say you have all of your issues with a label questions, you can go ahead and convert all of those through the labels page to discussions right now.
That is outstanding.
That is cool.
I love it.
That's actually really cool.
Becca, you got a bunch
hit
of
'em
questions
all.
coming in.
Go.
I'm going to try and hit
Oh,
a
we
bunch
got
of these.
more?
Okay. Oh, we
Let's
got a
do
lot.
it.
So this one
We got
coming in
tons,
from
as Jared
I'm
says.
ready.
at Cheve Lamba. Can we make discussions just replace Slack or other group chat platforms for discussions on GitHub repos?
I think that's a personal option. If you want to, if that's your preference for your community and it works for you, you're more than welcome to do that. But to be honest, every community uses tooling in a different way. So I'm sure one community's usage of Slack is quite different than another. So it wouldn't be fair of me to say that anything is going to replace another tool completely.
That
I don't
makes
see
sense.
Slack stopping for us anytime soon. It's so
Yeah.
good, right?
Also, yeah,
And like you said,
they have
everyone
custom
uses it
emojis.
differently. So
Yeah.
more
Let's move
questions,
on.
Jared. I know I can see them. There's lots there.
No, I want to keep asking. Okay, I'm going to do it. All right. At Mariano OG, how does Good First Issue and Explore work? Is it available already? I would be really excited to use it as a combination with code spaces.
Ooh. Interesting. I'm not sure of the integration there with code spaces, but yes, to github.com/explore already being available to all of our users on github.com. And what it is more of like a personalized feed. So you can look based on topics, collections, or even just your own personal feed. And so based on the types of contributions that you're making, we can give you different suggestions for what you might want to consider looking at. So if you're more of like a new contributor who's open to different types of issues with select topics, I'd highly recommend checking it out. You might find new issues that you could take on in a new community that you weren't previously aware of.
It's awesome. Yeah, I like it. Okay, we're going to move through because we got even more questions coming in. All right, from at CNK, is there an API endpoint that includes all contributions? If this is not publicly available yet, would it be possible for us to get access to a beta?
So I think what they're asking is whether or not they can see all of their contributions, which will go from issues, PRs, as well as discussions. And so that is not yet available. And we are looking at providing API endpoints for discussions. And so we definitely would have to think on that one a little bit more and understand what you're looking to do with it so that we can build it the right way. So if you can provide more details on what you're hoping to do with it, definitely let us know.
Feedback. Put the feedback
Yes.
forms in. Send them
I
all
love it.
in.
Okay,
We got time for a few more, Jared.
Yeah, I'm asking. A couple people asked this, but I'm going to choose the first person. At Splaktar, where can teams or organizations sign up for access to discussions?
So there is no wait list right now since we're hoping to come out with a public beta later this summer. So I'd say hold tight and hopefully you won't have to put your name on a wait list because it will be available to you shortly as long as you're in an open source community that does collaboration.
Absolutely.
Which
that's awesome.
Most communities do, right? Being open source, you should be collaborating. So if you're not collaborating,
You were listening,
collaborate so you can get on discussions.
Somebody's been listening. I was listening to Star Trek, but no, I'm joking.
That's all
You both
you
did a
took
good
away
job
from
balancing
that
each
Star
other.
Trek.
Okay, next
Well, we got
question.
time for a few more.
Okay, Terixo25. How does discussion differ from GitHub Teams discussion?
It's a great question. So GitHub Discussions is right where you exist right now with your code, which is at the repository level. The team discussions feature is not at the repository level. It's based on the team structure. So it's it's in a different location completely. So only teams can access that if you're using Teams on GitHub.
Makes sense. I like it. I think, do we have time for one more?
Yes, we have time for one more.
Let's do one more.
Yeah.
We're going to do one more. Okay. From J Fonseca 8. There's too many. Will there be any type of discussion spaces for people that are open for different types of projects in general, rather than just issues of a given project? Will there be any? Oh, okay. I see what they're asking. Let me repeat that. Will there be any type of discussion space for people that are open for different types of projects in general, rather than just issues of a given project? Just like general discussion.
Okay.
I think that's what they're going.
Yeah. So if I'm interpreting the question correctly, and again, give me feedback in the discussion. I'll be in there shortly. If I'm getting this wrong, it's going to be up to you how you use discussions. So the examples that I showed you of the categories is something that we're hearing a lot of communities wanting to use and already using, but we don't expect that every single community will have discussions that necessarily fit into those categories. So some are going to use it just for Q&A, others are going to use it just for thanks, and some for RFCs, while others would never use the discussion for an RFC, prefer a PR. So it's really going to be up to you how to configure your community discussion space. And we want to make sure that we give you the tools to do that at the end of the day.
Definitely. Well, discussions is a new thing. There's lots of questions coming through. Becca is going to be available on discussions for the next half an hour to answer all those questions and discussions. So we'll see you over there. Thank you again so much, Becca, for all your crazy Star Trek references and talking to us all about discussions and community. Thank you.
Thank you, Becca. You're the best.